James O'Con, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Tell me a bit about yourself. You're an extremely interesting guy.
Well, I'm from Georgia. I went to Georgia Tech. I became a structural engineer of some note. And my firm, O'Con & Company, was a leader in bringing science to engineering. Enjoyed a great career. Parallel to that career was my true love, the Maya and its technology. And for 42 years, had to make enough money as an engineer to afford to be an archaeologist or archaeological engineer. So I studied the Maya at first as a tourist because I didn't know anything, and then questions began to emerge. Like I would ask an archaeologist, how did they make this concrete? The Maya didn't have concrete; they were a Stone Age culture. This is not concrete. This is mortar. I'm going, well, it's the same thing. No, it's not. Well, I realized there were a lot of questions like that. I had to start looking at a solution to my questions, like how did they make their tools? How did they make the cement? How did they build their buildings with what kind of structural mechanisms? And that led to papers, and then finally one day I looked around and I said, you know what? I need a book. Well, archaeology, particularly Maya archaeology, needs to have a standard. How did they do it? How, in the middle of this unbelievable, beautiful rainforest, but it was isolated. They didn't have any outside influences like the Romans or the Greeks or the Egyptians. They had to do it all on their own with a little bit of help from their friends, their ancestors, like the older cultures like the Olmecs. But that's how I got into the game, and that's how the book, which has just been published, The Lost Secrets of Maya Technology, became into being as a series of questions and then papers and then big solutions using computers and logic to develop this the book.
So you're a hybrid then. You're not just an engineer. You're not an archaeologist, so you're an archaeo-engineer.
No, and I really am lucky that archaeologists have accepted me as sort of a pet or a hanger-on or something like that, because I do know about technology, and they know they don't know much about it.
I was going to say, they couldn't answer your questions. Yeah.
Right, and they couldn't have done research with their colleagues because they are anthropologists and they are art history majors, and they've got their what we call the Archaeological Union Card, which is PhD from Harvard, and that doesn't cover anything they have to do with my saints, thermodynamics and physics and chemistry and structural mechanics, hydraulics. Those are my tools that I use to solve the riddle of Maya technology.
What was the Maya society like, the civilization?
Let's say you were a city dweller. You know, they had the big cities with the populations up to 100,000. And then they had the hinterlands where there were smaller towns or villages and then agricultural areas. So let's pick a city dweller. And this is a 3,000-year-old civilization. Mm-hmm. That's how they were able to do so much innovative and just absolutely from zero. Well, they invented zero, by the way. That first society in the world that came up with the number zero and how to use it as not only as a placeholder, but as a negative number. At this point, let's pick some time in the classic period when they have built their cities. Previously, the Maya were fascinated with the stars. I mean, which led to, can you imagine every night having an unbelievable light show through a transparent sky of fixed orbs and moving planets, visiting comets, etc., meteors, and over the centuries, this is an early period, they developed methods of naming stars and naming planets, etc., and then they realized they had to figure out their periodicity, their cycles and their orbits, etc., and the naming and the counting and the astronomy that it took to get to those led to their writing systems, one of the 5 original written languages in the world, by the way. And they were total isolation. And we just broke the code here in the 1970s, so it's something new. So they developed the sciences that we just named, plus the fact that as they got more and more elite as scientists, as we treat scientists now, they decided they needed better buildings and better methods of communicating, like roads, and they needed to be able to solve the environmental problem. They had several environmental problems. One was no metal, two, lack of metal, and two was no beasts of burden, and three was a rainy season, the rain as heavy as you can imagine, and for 6 months. And there were 6 months of almost total drought. In fact, it's been called a virtual desert. So here we are in the city, and these elite, the scientists and the technicians and the sculptors and the artists, and then we go up to the merchants and priests and the royalty, needed better housing. They needed buildings to worship in and to work in, and administrative and temples, and they started building cities, little cities, and it got bigger, and then until they became quite large. Some of them are 19 miles, square miles aside in the area. Mm-hmm. So here we are. I'm coming back to your question. Mm-hmm. What do we see? We see an unbelievable city where 20 years ago I would be totally argued with about the nature of the cities. Archaeologists thought they were only used as ceremonial centers. They would only be occupied part-time. The rest of the time people would live in their little villages. That turned out to be who would build 270-foot-high buildings for part-time? Nobody. These were active, full-time cities that had supplies of water and food, roads coming in, etc., and big business. They lived off big business, off trade, off the materials that they can make.
But trade with whom? You said they were isolated.
They were isolated, but they weren't an empire. They were 50 independent city-states, and they traded with each other, which was a big business. Then they had overland trading networks north into Mesoamerica with the Mexican area, with the Mixtecs. Aztecs wouldn't come along for 300 years after they collapsed. So there were other people in the north, and then south there was all the cultures in Central America and Honduras and Costa Rica and El Salvador and the islands in the Pacific, the Caribbean. They traded with those using their long-range seagoing canoes or boats. They're really unbelievable, 60 to 80 feet long. There was a big trade network. Now, the Maya heartland, the domain, was only 125,000 square miles, which wasn't real big. If you imagine Yucatan, that was about the whole area. And they had a very busy trade network inside because they needed the trade to keep their buildings keep the building programs going, to keep people paid. And they had a barter system, which is very logical, by the way. They used, the base was cacao or chocolate beans, etc. Mm-hmm. So they did trade with a wide area. So there was a lot of business and trading. There were markets. There were huge plazas where people met and did their business. And they were surrounded by unbelievable buildings that were made out of concrete and stone facings, covered in stucco, painted in the most, I've seen only remnants of the paint, red and blue and green. And most of the big buildings were mixed with mica. They shone. They would reflect the light of the sun, so they would be glistening. And you had a morning and an afternoon and an evening ritual that was probably totally managed by the sunlight, because you get up at dawn and you go to bed around dark. It was just like Europe. There was no electricity or anything like that. It was like sun up, sun down. That was your day. But during the day, it was full of work. If you worked in the farms, it was agriculture. If you worked in the city, it was trade. Or if you were a sculptor or an artist, you were working at your trade. So it was just like today, just like everything except paper money. They had another system that seemed to work for them. Mm-hmm. And the day was like it would be for anybody based on their occupation. Housewives were housewives, and sculptors were sculptors, and the astronomers and the mathematicians and the engineers were doing their job. And it was just like a day in America. It was a day in in the Yucatan.
Have you seen the movie Apocalypto?
Yes.
Is that an accurate portrayal?
I saw so many blatant technical and historical and chronological errors that it almost ruined the movie for me. Because see, the part about killing the Tapar and capturing people to bring to the city was basically true. But the Maya were not big sacrificers. Mm-hmm. They would go and fight a war, and they would make slaves out of the captors, which they may have been planning with those village guys. But they would only take the king as hostage and trade him around for a couple of years and torture him and then kill him. I mean, no, I'm not giving anybody any credit. I don't approve of it. But they weren't like the great stories of the Aztecs. The Aztecs collected 20,000 people for a big weekend. And they would work several temples and the pyramids and sacrifice 20,000. And that was witnessed by the Spanish. But let's go back 500 years to the Maya. Mm-hmm. They didn't do that. We're talking about Apocalypto. When they were walking through, coming up to town, and you remember there was this white powder over all these people, and there were these fires. They were supposed to be making cement. Except, have you looked at my book or read the book at all? Because there's pictures in there, photographs.
Well, I have the book right here, James.
Well, in the chapter 6, there's a picture of a Maya cement kiln, which was a thermodynamic reactor that elevated burning wood up to a temperature of like 1,400 degrees Celsius. It normally burns around 500 or 600 degrees. And they needed that temperature to change to melt limestone. But in Apocalypto, they show fires burning, but with sort of like teepee type fires. You know, like you maybe as a Boy Scout with all the logs pointing towards the center and stuff like that, up in like a teepee. Okay, yeah. Instead of the horizontal structure that was really used for their cement making. I noticed that, but I don't think many other people noticed it because the book hadn't come out yet, and I hadn't really released the methodology that they used. And it's there in the research. You got to recognize it, and it's also still being used by Maya in remote areas because cement is expensive if you pour it, but you could make cement using their same old technique. And also, at the end, when I'm picking the two big things. The heroes were being chased by the bad guys, mm-hmm. and they all stopped in awe. And here comes a Spanish ship. I'm assuming it's Spanish. That was just amazing, except when the big cities failed, it was in the year 900, and the Spanish didn't come for another 600 years. That was I call it continuity errors. So, other than that,
other than being completely historically inaccurate, good movie.
Because they had big cities and they had little, and I enjoyed it. You know.
Yeah, I did too.
I enjoyed the actors and the drama of being trapped in a well and stuff like that. That was true that they did have that kind of a well in small towns, small villages.
And you've been down there. You've been to all these places and lived down there, right?
Yes.
So what was that like?
Well, I'm in Atlanta.
I mean, you're not staying at the Four Seasons, I'm assuming.
No. Listen, now I have a condo that it's near Cancun that I can work out of on some nearby sites, the day sites. I used to have to pack a pack, not really a pack, but go into an overland vehicle or dugout canoe, or sometimes in a pack, and travel overland or on the rivers in dugout canoes to get to sites that were so remote it took 2 or 3 days on the river to get to them. That one of them is Yaxchilan, where the Great Bridge was discovered. And there you had to pitch your tent and cook your food and do the things I learned in the Boy Scout. Hey, that was one thing I had advantage of. I was a really good Boy Scout, and I learned to cook and shoot and use knives and tie ropes, and all these things are really practical and useful in when you're camping out in the middle of a rainforest. So I didn't have any problem with that. But now most sites won't let you camp. So there's somewhere nearby a little settlement where there's some jungle inns, and they're not bad. They're nice and clean, and they've got mosquito netting and fans and stuff like that, and usually a good cook. So I don't have any problem anymore. I stay in those places. But most of them are getting pretty good hotels now. I don't mean great hotels. You would not recognize some of them as hotels, but they're like a series of bungalows that you stay in is the rooms, and they have a big hut. Let's call it that.
It's better than sleeping on a bunch of leaves.
Absolutely, and the restaurants are really good.
Oh yeah, I bet.
So I don't have to eat my tins or cans of. I'm big on tuna fish and sardines and crackers, and that was what we generally lived off of while we were staying in the rooms. And I'm talking about the old days. It'd be only 20 years ago.
Hey, if you're ever in Costa Rica, you can stay at my place there. I got a place.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I have a place in Coita, which is on the eastern shore, just north of Puerto Viejo. Doors open.
I'll take you up on that, and I'll swap with my condo down in Cancun. It's at the very end of Cancun, so you don't see any tourists.
Tell me about the discovery of the bridge, and this has landed you into the Guinness World Book of Records.
Well,
amazing.
Let's go back to the old days. This was 1989, and I was in a dugout canoe, and I was prepared to camp, which I did at the site. And as we pulled into the site, I noticed this near the South Shore, which was where the city was, a circular ruin of stone and concrete that extended some 13, 14 feet out of the water, and it was like 35 feet in diameter. I looked on the other side, on the north side, and I could see a similar but more damaged rock pile, let's call it that, right? Because it was really, it was proved to be one of the pilings, but it was not much there. And when we landed, it was dark, and we had dinner. And the next day I went out and took photographs of the ruins, and then we continued on our trip. We were looking at other sites. But during the next 2 years, I did a lot of research on the site, and I had a friend I'd met at Yaxchilan who flew his plane down from Canada, one of your colleagues, he was a bush pilot, and he took aerial photographs of the river and the site. And I was able to view both the piers in the river and a parallel or an inline structure on the plaza, 75 feet above the water, which turned out to be the bridge entrance. And so I went back in 93 and 94, and during those times I discovered in the office, by using a computer and satellite views of the area, that these structures truly lined up, and I came up with a thesis that had to be a suspension bridge. And I knew at that time that the Maya had cement and concrete, and they had the strongest ropes in the world, which everybody in the world used later. Hemp ropes, you've probably heard of those. And they were, the strength was like 18,000 pounds a square inch, which was strong as iron in the early days. You still have iron, it's 20,000 pounds per square inch. So I put together a concept with the bridge.
And as you said earlier, they had no metal, right?
Ropes were the closest thing to cables that were existing, and the only real use we had them in the modern world was on the sailing ships. Every ship was equipped with hemp ropes for hawsers and lines and sheets and everything else, sheets, scales, and everything. And in construction, we always used hemp or Henneken ropes for construction cranes. Then, at the end of the 19th century, we being the Europeans, we invented steel cables. But let's go back to the Maya. They used a material that was the same strength and used the same concept as like the three-span Golden Gate Bridge. Everybody is familiar with that one. It would span from the shore, east shore, to the pylon in the river, and the middle span was 206 feet or 63 meters, which made it the longest bridge in the ancient world. And there wasn't another one. That was about 700 AD. The next time a bridge was built, it was only a few feet longer, and it had more spans than one, was in Italy, in Adano, in 1377. So that gave us like almost 700 years of being number one. But see, nobody knew that Maya existed, and we didn't know that they existed. So we just had a big bridge where the rope had to be replaced every year because a fiber-like cable, rope cable will deteriorate with the rain and the sun and et cetera. So they had to replace the cables each year. I did a 3D fly-through that was used on the History Channel, but I was just thinking there a second. In order to prove to archaeology and to science and to engineering that the bridge existed, I had to absolutely prove a need for the bridge. The city of Yaxchilan is founded on a big omega in this river. It's a wide river, like in flood season, 600 feet wide, which is a pretty good sized river. And you couldn't get across from this omega, which had the city on it, to the other side, which had all the farms and small villages, etc., unless you had a lifeline like a bridge. So that was my rationale. And then I showed how they did it. And engineering and science bought it within a year. Archaeologists are still tossing about it. Many of them think that the pilings are, as I said, outposts for guard stations or toll booths or something like that. But more and more, since the books come out, they're coming around to believing in the technology of the Maya. I mean, after all, the Maya invented the number 0 and could take 20 to the 20th power, had astronomy as accurate as our, in fact, in terms of the length of the year, even more accurate than our modern calculations. So they had all these amazing scientific things, but archaeology just didn't believe they could make tools out of jadeite, which is a jewel-like material, as you probably know, but it's harder than iron. And could make the cement that we've been describing for making cast-in-place concrete and the structures with this Maya arch. They could build 7 or 8-story buildings, which nobody did.
Obsidian as well, right?
Oh, yeah, obsidian, that was their tool for cutting. The obsidian blade can be sharpened or down to 1 molecule in thickness. Now, that's really, really thick. In fact, it's still being used in modern science for scalpels in thoracic and eye surgery because they make a cleaner cut and they heal faster. So the legacy lives on as far as tools are going. And then we go on with the bridges and the water supplies and the roadways, which are unbelievable, stretching hundreds of kilometers, straight as an arrow, paved. So they would be absolutely 24-hour-a-day roads that was good for the rainy season and the dry season. And the transportation system, which was all manpower because there was no beast of burden, no horses, no oxen. And that's why they didn't use the wheel, because why make a cart that weighs 1,000 pounds and have to have 10 men pull it and then another 10 men pull the load? So they developed the tump line. Now, it wasn't original. There was parallel thinking around the world. Device that was strapped for your head and it holds the load on your back. The Maya could carry their weight, which is about 125 pounds, for 12 hours a day. They were the stevedores and the cargo carriers of the Maya. And they could climb up construction sites through the scaffolding with loads of stones on their back. And one of the things everybody always says is, how did they pick up those big stones? Well, they didn't use big stones. They very rarely. They had a way of doing that, but they mostly made stones that were like 100 pounds max. So a man could carry them. And then because they didn't need the big ones, they made these walls out of these really nice work stones inside and outside, and then plastered it. So it didn't matter if they were making a wall out of a big stone or a man-sized stone, because they plastered it, painted it. The plaster was for decoration, but it was a great waterproofing device.
They were making concrete, so could they not have made a cast and made a brick?
Well, bricks are made out of clay. You have very little clay. Concrete bricks are only modern, and it's after concrete became a very common element, and it was very expensive in modern times. But in those days, it took 5 acres of trees to burn to get 1 cubic meter of cement. I don't know how many bricks that would make, but not a lot. They found it was easier to use limestone and work it into a shape that fit into these walls. And the interior of the walls were filled with cast-in-place concrete, which bonded outside and inside surface of the wall, and then they would plaster it. In many places, the plasters remained for 1,200, 1,300 years, right through all the rain and hurricanes and the forest and the creeping jungle, etc.
All right, so the big question. It's 2012, December 21st is coming, and we're all going to die. It's the end of the world, right? You've studied this stuff, so
that's an opinion. A lot of people have taken that as opinion because of finding that date. There's only been, until last few weeks, there's only been one place in all of the Maya archaeology. There was like 4,000 monuments with hieroglyphics on them, where that date, which is September 21st, 2012, which is 13.0.0.0 in Maya, was even written. And on that, on Monument 4 at Tortuguera, it says, this god, I can't remember his name right now, but it's a minor god, shall come down and get dressed on this day. Well, okay, so he's going to get dressed. Is he going to get dressed for a party? Is he going to get dressed to go out and do something? Nobody knows, but there's no indication of portent or disaster. And the other place was this date, and I don't mean the calendar. There's been calendars found in recently in Guatemala, and of course there's a famous calendar in one of the codices. But anyway, the second date was found at La Corona, and it is a message of commemoration, pride, and he shall, being this king from Tikal, and this is, he shall reign until the end of this cycle, which is 13.0.0.0. And that's, that's a message of hope. And we don't have any real clear message for the 13.0.0.0, which is in La Tortuga. So we fall back on, how did they come up with this date anyway? Are you aware of that, Russell?
No, I'm not.
Okay. And I don't know how they did it, but the Maya astronomers calculated the precession of the Earth. And the precession is the big circle that 25,600 years. It makes one cycle, and that's called a wobble. Okay. And I don't know how they did it, but apparently they were really accurate, and they decided to break this into 5 different pieces or creations or worlds. Let's say, Russell, that you and I were astronomers, Maya astronomers. And here we go. We solved the big problem. We know how long it takes the Earth to make one wobble, and we broke into 5 pieces. We know we got 5,126 years and 123 days. We said, okay, we're in the middle somewhere of a period. Where's the end and where's the beginning? And they had a choice. Only choice they had, like Hobson's choice, they could only pick the end because the beginning had already started. So they said, look, let's pick a good date. Let's pick New Year's at a time, which is, by the way, December 21st. It's the winter solstice. And let's pick a date when really we got some really good galactic alignment. So they picked a date when the zenith of the sun at the winter solstice would be directly in line with the dark trough in the middle of the Milky Way. And they could do this. They were really great. Don't ask me how, but they did it. And they had a choice of 2 or 3 years, so they picked, but they were absolutely sure it would be down the middle. They picked 2012. Well, December 21st was easy. It's a holiday, right? Like saying, let's have it on New Year's, like you're supposed to have an end of or beginning of a period. It's like us a few years ago with 2012. Remember, everybody was saying, oh, man, the computers are going to all crash. Planes are going to fall from the sky. Everything was going to happen.
With Y2K, yeah.
Yeah, Y2K because of the change in the computers and the dates and stuff like that. So nothing happened. And I was listening to international shortwave radios, checking the international dateline to see if because it was going to happen there first, right? So anyway, they picked the end of the beginning of the new year in the year 2012, and modern Maya don't have any significance for that day. They don't use that calendar anymore. It's only used by archaeologists. And the Maya, who allegedly picked this as a day of doom, couldn't even predict their own demise in the year 900, or give or take a year or two there, okay? So what did it mean? We don't know, but I can guarantee you on that morning, the worst thing you have to fear is you've only got 4 shopping days till Christmas. I've looked at NASA and all their reports. I've been checking on all the asteroids, and I've just been really afire with the stories on Curiosity landing on Mars and stuff like that. But I've also been tuned into the geophysicists or watch the activity of volcanoes and earthquakes around the world, and I've actually myself looked at patterns, and I don't see anything that looks tending to be a big disaster in, what do we got, 3 months, 4 months till the date. So I can't help you with supporting any doomsday theory there, and that's an honest statement. But wait, like I told somebody the other day, there's at least 4,000 really good Maya sites been discovered. Only 40 have really been actually excavated, where archaeologists have gone in and deciphered the different materials. So, there may be something else hidden out there in the other 3,960. But at this time, I can't report anything.
The Lost Secrets of Maya Technology. This is a really nice book, by the way, James. A lot of pictures in it, full color photos. Everything we've discussed is mapped out in detail with pictures, diagrams. It's brilliant.
One thing my publisher told me at the beginning was, I don't want nothing about 2012 in this book. I went, what? What do you mean? I got to put in the astronomy about how they calculated the date based on the precession. They said, oh, that's okay. Don't get in any mumbo jumbo on it. And I don't mean mumbo jumbo. You know what I mean? I mean, there's people that, there's dark planets coming at us. There's polar shifts. By the way, polar shifts, if you really take years to actually execute. And there has been polar shifts, and they happen about every 500,000 years. And we're due. Thing is, there's no sign that it's going to happen that quick.
Where do I buy this, James? Just go to Amazon?
You can buy it. Amazon.com. It was yesterday. I was really pleased. It was number 3 in Maya history and number 1 in world architecture, which is absolutely amazing. Now, these are not big areas, and but I'm really pleased to see that a book by just a poor old engineer like me is sitting up there with all the archaeologists and architects in the world. I'm ahead of Tom Wolfe in Bauhaus and our house. And that made me embarrassed almost because he's a real writer. I'm just a guy that put together some ideas, but people really are interested in the concept of the Maya and their technology. And I'm really pleased that I'm getting received so well by the public and you, Russell. That's just
but it's not a fluff piece. Some books these days really just don't have much to say, and they're just regurgitating other things. This is an original piece, and it's got a lot of original things to say. It's an achievement.
Thank you very much. And I have said that to people. What's in the book? I said, I think I've had some original thoughts. And they started laughing. Oh, they'll say, why are you laughing? You think you have an original thought in this book? I said, have you read it? No. I said, you think you can read it? Well, I might because you wrote it, but these are only my friends. What can I tell you?
Hey, listen.
Most of them are technicians.
Well, then why don't these guys attend one of your lectures? You've got a lecture happening in New York on September 24th. Briefly tell me about that.
Well, it's really an honor to be asked by the Explorers Club. This is the International Society for Exploration of Land, Sea, and Space, and name an explorer from Admiral Byrd, Admiral Perry, on through Hillary, that climbed the first man to climb Mount Everest and was our president until he died 2 years ago. I am a member of the club, by the way, but to be asked to give a lecture on the amazing discoveries of the Maya just blows me away. I'm really proud to represent, my neighborhood, the state of Georgia, America, and engineers in describing these discoveries.
James, what a pleasure. I've really appreciated you being on the program. Thanks very much.
Hey, call on me anytime. It's been a pleasure.